Over the past few years, I've gotten to do a little bit more teaching on the topic of video production, such as with my local camera shop, George's Cameras, with my local church, Life Church, and with USyd. And every time I repeat the same things over and over again, I think to myself, man, I should really record this so that way I don't have to repeat it over and over again. But also, having a visual reference I find really helps the audience grasp what I'm trying to say. So this is a first attempt of a part 1 to, I would say, a few parts to a series on video fundamentals to hopefully help you out there understand what video is all about and how to shoot it better. So kicking it off in this first part, we're going to talk about two things. Firstly, frame rates and resolution. This is the core of videos that we record nowadays. Whether you're shooting on your phone, a cinema camera, a DSLR, or a mirrorless camera, these are things that you can apply to all of the above. And just like every video, I always have to do two things. So in this one, I'm cleaning out my car because I left a cup of Fanta in my car and I forgot that the cup is paper, and eventually it started leaking. Bit gross. Starting off with what video is and how it's captured. Now, the easiest way to grasp this concept is video is just a whole bunch of photos being played very quickly. If you've ever seen a flipbook being done, you'll know that it's just a whole bunch of pages being flipped through quite quickly to portray a motion. And this is the exact same for video. Back in the day when they shot on film, they had to calculate the minimum amount of photos they needed to take per second in order to capture a smooth video. And the number they came to was 24. Here in Australia, we shoot in 25, meaning we need 25 photos per second in order to capture a smooth video. Once we grasp the concept of 25 or 24 frames, depending on where you are, equals 1 second of video, then we can think about what happens when we shoot more than 25 frames per second. That's right, slow motion. Now, if you take 25 frames a second and you slow it down, it's already the minimum amount of frames you need to make a smooth video. If you slow it down, it's not going to be smooth anymore. It's going to look more so like a crappy slideshow. So that's why capturing more frames, for example 50 frames a second, means you're capturing double the amount of frames you need for a smooth video, so you can actually stretch that out and slow it down and make it look smooth. And that's the same thing that applies to capturing more frames, like 100, 240, or even 960 frames a second. So the takeaway here is that 25 frames a second is what pretty much every video is viewed at. But if you record higher than 25 frames a second, like 50, 100, 240, means you can slow it down later in post. And the more frames you capture, the slower you can get it. The way I do it is that I know that 25 frames a second is the standard, which means the more frames I capture, like 50 frames, means I'm able to slow it down by 2 times speed. For example, if I shoot 100 frames a second, I'm able to slow it down 4 times speed. Kinda get it? Also, I'm going back inside now because God is cleaning my car for me. It's actually raining. Damn it. Now, pausing frame rates for a second and moving on to resolution, if you've ever bought a monitor or a TV, you'll see a lot of things like 4K, 6K, 8K, 1080p, Full HD. Essentially what this is referring to is just the amount of pixels in the actual display. The more pixels you have, the sharper your image is going to be. Now 1080p I still would say is the standard, seeing as most phones are still in Full HD and it's even YouTube's default setting. But now we are starting to see a lot more things come into 4K, such as TVs, monitors, and a lot more cameras can shoot 4K. Even my phone can now shoot 4K. I personally use 4K to shoot all my videos, meaning I get 4 times the amount of resolution as standard video. And it does have its pros and cons, but starting off with the pros, first up, if I'm going to export in 1080p Full HD, that means I have 4 times the amount of resolution to reframe and crop if I wanted to. On top of that, if you're shooting in 4K and exporting in 1080p, you're going to get a sharper image because your pixel sizes are actually shrinking, which means you can hide a lot of noise and get a sharper image. Secondly, shooting in 4K gives you so much more information to work with to add effects such as warp stabilizer, camera shake, and tracking. Thirdly, shooting in 4K, I'm able to future-proof myself. When 4K becomes the norm, I can just re-export all my videos without losing quality. However, with all these pros, there does come across a few cons, such as file size. It's so much bigger of a file compared to a standard video, meaning it's going to fill up your hard drives a lot quicker. And you do need a pretty decent computer to edit on, otherwise your computer's going to lag quite a lot with the footage. So just to recap, video is just a whole bunch of photos being played very quickly in order to make a smooth video. And here in Australia, you need a minimum of 25 photos per second in order to create a smooth video. This is known as frames per second. Next up, resolution. Full HD 1080p is the standard, but we are moving into 4K. And 4K does give you, as a filmmaker, a little bit more flexibility in post to play around with and get a sharper image. But you do need a bigger hard drive as well as a pretty decent computer to use it. Now for some real world examples. If I'm shooting a talking to camera, I know that I don't need to slow that down, so I'm always going to shoot that in 25 frames per second. And usually when I'm shooting an interview, I always shoot in 4K, so that way I can always punch in and use it as a second angle. Next up, depending on what the product is, I shoot a lot of B-roll in 50 frames per second. This means every 1 second of video I am capturing, I'm essentially capturing 2 seconds of video. It just gives you a lot more flexibility later in post, and also if you have shakier hands, it does smooth out your footage. Now for those shooting on Panasonic, Fujifilm, or Sony, there usually is another number next to both your frame rate and resolution, and this is your compression rate. The lower the number, the more compressed your video is going to be, and the higher the number, the more uncompressed your video is going to be. I personally always want to shoot at the highest, so that way I get the best result out of the camera. But if you're worried about file size, you can shoot in a lower compression rate. Just note that your video is going to be a little bit more compressed, so you're not going to get the maximum quality out of your camera. Finally, I get the question asked a lot, why don't I always shoot at 50 frames per second, so that way I can always slow things down? Well, in cameras, when you shoot at a higher frame rate, it needs to process a lot more. So usually it compresses your footage a little bit more than shooting in 25 frames per second. So when you can shoot at 25 frames a second, that way you know you're gonna get the best footage possible. So that wraps it up for this video. If you've been shooting videos for a while, I hope you still got something out of this. And if you have any comments or questions, pop them down in the comments below. If you're wondering about this chair, I've been using it for around 2 weeks now, and it's pretty good. I'm definitely just a bit too tall for the headrest, so I just took that off. But other than that, it's pretty good, and I'll put a link in the description where I got it from as well. Anyways, that's it for this video. We're almost past 200 subscribers, which is dope, and thank you for everyone's feedback and encouragement. So we're still going to continue to make these videos. And with that, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.